Hi and welcome to this lecture on multi-channel branding or multi-channel retailing or multi-channel marketing, whichever you prefer. I call it multi-channel branding here because branding is the focus, but basically it could also be, it's as relevant for marketing in a general perspective, but also for retailing, because retailing is sort of the interface between the industry and the consumer. Okay, let's have a look at the slides. The main topics here will be first on how digital marketing has transformed marketing. So we'll look in that from a couple of perspectives. We'll go into affordances, something referred to as affordances, which is that many times the digital gadgets that we or that the industry produces for us, they over time change the uses that we use them for, like a smartphone. Initially it was a phone, but then it was more of a texting machine, and now it's more of a small computer and perhaps even a little scanner or sensor helping our senses. The other aspect that's also going to be part of this sort of thing is more in general transformation. I should say that this lecture, it sort of completes the previous lecture on retail consolidation. So it brings the digital or the more modern perspective to that, the digital world. But it's also a first part of a multi-channel marketing lecture. I'm going to give you a second lecture on multi-channel marketing from the individual retailer's perspective soon, when I'm going to talk about how I've worked with my colleague or co-owner in my own grocery store. But first we'll start with this lecture. Okay, so it used to be the case that actually it was Procter & Gamble who invented the concept of first moment of truth, and the first moment of truth is when the shopper first meets with the brand in the store. So the theory was consideration sets, some kind of funnel where you had a lot of different brands or products available. You were aware of some of these, you considered some of them, and you made a final purchase. And all this happened, sort of say, in the store, and that was the first moment of truth. Of course, could also be that you saw some ads or so on TV or in a flyer, but first moment of truth nevertheless, and it was to the greatest extent occurring in the store. Then Procter also said that there is a second moment of truth, and that's when you use the product. So if you buy a dishwashing detergent, you buy the brand perhaps that you recognize from the shelf, could be Fairy in the P&G case, or Yes. And then you try it at home, and perhaps it fits with a commercial that it lasts longer than other detergents, or it doesn't. Anyhow, this is sort of the traditional marketing context. Nowadays, though, we're facing something totally different. Nowadays, we talk about the customer journey, not the sort of funnel-like aspect, but you have so many different touch points. And actually, Google has added a zero moment of truth, or CMOT, to the list of moments of truth. And you can see on this slide here that there are so many different new possible touch points. Okay, television, radio, print, events, that's all touch points, and also displays could be an old label or old touch point, but in this case a label is a banner ad, so something that you find on the net. And search, PPC, pay per click, so you can have ads like that. SEO stands for search engine optimization, which is a way to make your web page rank higher on in primarily Google search. Content marketing is something that's sort of grown out of also digital marketing. We'll talk more about that on Wednesday morning, or actually perhaps it's on Tuesday morning when Julie Atherton comes and visits. she will talk about the inbound and outbound model. We have influencer outreach, social media. So the landscape has changed a lot, and nowadays we don't just talk about the first moment of truth and second moment of truth and the physical store anymore, but rather it's a whole idea with big data and retargeting and all those things that we'll come to eventually. Let's see, are there some more central touch points here? CRO. So that's conversion ratio optimization that could be relevant. Remarketing or retargeting is when you visited a website, perhaps you've been searching for shoes or something, and then you go to a new website, and then all of a sudden you're exposed to ads for shoes. So that's based on cookies, that they trace your computer where it's been, and or they trace you and where you've been, and try to sort of reach out to you at a later stage. Okay, when you look at, so that's sort of from the customer standpoint. We don't talk so much about customer decision making anymore. Now we talk more about customer journeys and touch points, and we want it to be seamless and all that. If we want to dissect or analyze digital, it can actually boil down to a lot of different things. We talk about different audiences. This was like at the early stages of digitalization. You talked about that the fragmentation. It wasn't only TV anymore or only newspapers. Now it's so much about insights of where shoppers are, and actually behavior nowadays is not as much, or it's not only used to describe or talk about when shoppers buy something or go to a certain store. Behavior is to the largest extent actually which sites shopper visits, and what they click on, and how long they stay on a certain page, and if they go back to the SERP, search engine report page, or if they stay on the website, if they type in the URL address directly, or if they use a search engine, and so on. Digital devices, that's something totally new, and actually a lot of the talk today is about mobile and Internet of Things. So those are like the new devices that everybody talk about, different digital platforms. Many times nowadays, it's not that you talk about perhaps advertising and promotions. It could rather be that you talk about social media strategies. So you devote budgets to how much you want to spend on Facebook, how much you want to spend on Twitter. So it's a whole new landscape of potential platforms and media and channels to work on. So media and channels, as you can see, a bunch of different digital aspects here: email, search engine, social networks, and digital data, big data. It's for a long period of time, companies gathered data with the help of loyalty cards and transaction registers, but they didn't really do anything with it. Now, finally, with various kinds of algorithms, companies actually benefit from the big amounts of data that they have, but perhaps not so much in the traditional marketing senses, but rather in the digital marketing sense and in supply chain collaborations and so on. And of course, digital technology constantly changing, new touch points, new uses. I'm running a bunch of different research projects on new devices. Could be anything from how to use the phone, or apps, or other kinds of scanners, or digital screens, touch screens, kiosks. With H&M, we collaborate around smart mirrors that can be a voice-controlled mirror where you talk to it to perhaps see where a product comes from, the environmental footprint that it's caused, If it comes in different colors and sizes, you can try other garments and the ones that you actually have on. You can have a t-shirt on like mine, and I can say, no, I don't want the brown one, I want a blue one, and then the mirror image is in blue instead. So this is one aspect, that is a continuous growth of different kinds of things. And I think, you all know, Internet of Things is really like connected big data. Everything's connectedness, Internet of Things. That's really going to be, for the closest years, that's going to be the big thing. This is sort of I wanted to have this here just because I think it's interesting to see it, all those things. You take it for granted that everything's been around for so long now, but at least me, when I look at movies, I tend to, think that it's really unfavorable for filmmakers, because you can tell easily now that a film feels really old if it's only like 5-6 years old, because of the smartphones they have, or the lack of computers, or the old computers they have. If someone is using an old desktop computer, or not a smartphone but some other kind of mobile, it feels like a movie from some ancient era. So I think this is it's almost like the kind of exercises you can perform on a New Year's Eve, to look at a little list like this, that Amazon's been around for quite a long time, actually, since 1994. But I mean, I remember Alta Vista. I remember when Hotmail came, web-based email. And that's not so long ago. Google in 1998, Skype 2003, Second Life, but that's sort of history. Facebook 2004, YouTube 2005. I remember the first time I watched YouTube was a guy playing a guitar, and I thought, what's this? Why would you like to upload a film of yourself doing something? Who would want to look at that? And now I look at my kids, and they spend like 3 hours a day on YouTube. And the iPhone, of course, the game changer. You can think about what were the big game changers for you. I can feel now that the product life cycles are really short for these apps. Like here says Snapchat. My kids use it a lot, of course, but Musical.ly just disappeared, replaced by TikTok, and my son is 15 and he's too old for that, so my daughters are younger, they play with that. So it's fascinating times that we're in. Have a little thought about what do you think has been the most sort of important aspects for you. And it's fascinating also if you look at the speed of things. I mean, this is of course not the perhaps truest image of everything, but if you just take into consideration that it took 38 years for radio to reach 50 million users, and it took Pokemon Go 19 days, it's interesting. And you look at the world's biggest brands, and Facebook and YouTube, and lots of those are bigger than India's population, or have more users than India's population. Okay, so now we've looked a bit at that sort of landscape, and I think it's as a marketing person or as a branding person, it's interesting to look at of course Steve Jobs and his philosophy. I've been a Mac user since 1998. Macintosh first appeared in 1994. My first Mac was a Mac Plus, but then I also had the old ones. I even owned an Apple II for a while. So I know I've sort of traveled or made a journey together with Steve Jobs and Mike Wozniak and those guys. And I really think they were cool in when they talked about changing the world one person at a time, and looking at the usefulness of products and not just the technology behind it. I think that was really a big difference for me when I choose initially to work with Macs instead of with PCs, even though the differences are, it's a totally different idea now. But anyhow, this idea of looking at what to use products for. It's related to something that's in this kind of theories called affordances. So if you take a smartphone, what can it be used for? What is it actually? I mean, like texting, nobody really understood that would become so important. It was just something. Initially, you could use only 200 letters or symbols, and it was, something that nobody really thought could be anything. And now it's like a major part of things. And the camera and the GPS functions, they just grow in importance, what you can do with them. So I think to some extent you don't really know what a product is initially, and it's marketing people who develop it. By the way, I guess you have read Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I guess you also feel the how sort of using your smartphone, at least initially, how it's made you think about this guide, the Hitchhiker's Guide. On the left there you also have an Apple Newton. I owned one of those in the beginning, but that was sort of prior to Wi-Fi, and so that was pretty useless, very expensive but very useless product. But today you can see that smartphones are being used more and more. Just look at this COVID-19 thing, how much both for keeping track of people and spreading information and everything, how much smartphones are used. The headlines have disappeared here. So it's smartphone usage and sort of new apps. It should be the headlines for those. I can change that so you can look at the slides later to follow it. And so affordances is actually the use of the product separated from the product in itself. And I think this is an old idea, as you can see, Gibson 1977, but I think it's really fascinating to think about it, because this is, when I work with H&M on apps, for instance, it's fairly simple features they use. They use the map function in accordance with the camera, so you can bring up your phone. Let's see, I can do it here. You can take your phone, open up your H&M app, and then you can use the camera, hopefully. Let's see, I'll do it so you can see it, but then I won't be able to see it. Well, let's see. If I do it like that, do you see my shirt there? And then I take a photo of it, hopefully. And then let's see what happens. Well, you thought it was a shirt or a skirt, but anyhow, so this connected to that you have a map, so you can, if I now push this, I want this, well, obviously I should be able to see stores in my surroundings, the stock, the sizes, the prices. So a lot of features like this, they actually make use. It's fairly simple functions in the devices, but you think about, or you really sort of try to make the best of it, and using the cameras, using the map functions, using the search, the voice in the phones. I mean, there's so much more you can do with it, and I think it's interesting to see how this is sort of growing. I mean, all computers, all phones have both cameras and microphones installed from the beginning. So all those Alexas, and so I mean, it's just growing. I think a voice is something that's going to come a lot because it's so easy, and I've started to use it a bit. My Siri function, and it's pretty handy, especially when you drive, and soon you're going to be able to talk to your fridge and ask it what's in there, so you don't have to open the door, and so many different things, and order from the fridge and stuff. But that's sort of all news. But I think the mechanism behind this is affordances, and I think it's worth sort of having a look at. Okay, so I've already talked all about that. Okay, so the whole digital transformation aspect. This 7S's model is from Chaffee and McChewick, something like that, a textbook that I use in some other units. And they look at sort of, okay, companies don't always cope with this new digital world. What could be the obstacles? What could be the problems or the things they have to look at before they are through? So strategy could be one, of course. Do they see digital as a core, or is it just some kind of side function? Structure of the company, of course, depending on what kind of company you have. Perhaps you need to be more in agile teams. Perhaps you have to have the IT department spread out throughout the whole organization or not. Systems, of course. You might be stuck with an old system. I know one manufacturing company I talked to, they weren't that big, but they had 17 different systems. One for production, one for administration, one for warehouse, one for office use, and so on. So 17 different systems. And then, of course, if you want to start to work with, I don't know, social media or just something, and you want to sort of really do this digital transformation, it takes a lot of work, a lot of restructuring, a lot of money. Staff, of course. It's hard to know how much to invest in education and how much to change in information. It's and also things change so fast. So what if you decide in a strategy, in a structure, in a systems way, in a staff education way that you want to go for Facebook, and then Facebook is being replaced by something? Style, the sort of company culture could be very important also. Young, old people working there. Are you a low-cost company that always try to just, do everything the cheapest possible way, or are you more of a upscale kind of fancy company? I'm not saying that one is easier to transform than the other, but those things definitely have an effect on how easy you can be turned around. Skills, of course, and superordinate goals. So if you are considering yourself as just harvesting on an old investment, perhaps you try to stick to old kind of things rather than jumping on into new worlds. And this is a sort of a timeline where you can look at, as you see, digital Darwinism or evolution. So I used to start, when I think about this, in the upper green corner to the right, data paralysis, and how you can move to, you start to realize the sort of need to do something. You go down to the education, then over to the blue side with digital ethnography, Darwinism, behavioral economics, and leaders lead. And I've seen this happening in a bunch of companies, sort of working with the 7S's and some kind of timeline like this. Companies that used to be lagging behind that are now at the forefront. H&M is a good example there. They got a lot of criticisms for not being on top of things with especially mobile applications, and now I think they are almost leading that race. So it's definitely doable, but it's a very deep shift in culture, in structure, in focus, in strategies, and also it's challenging because you don't know what's around the corner. So you might, find yourself investing in, I don't know, warehouses using a certain kind of software systems to do the Internet of things, and then all of a sudden that stops working? What if you bought a lot of servers before the clouds appeared? Or what if you invest a lot in cloud functions and they are being replaced by something else, some new kind of media, or a new kind of database structure or something like that? So it's not easy things. A lot of companies choose to follow. A lot of companies choose to not develop their own systems, but rather buy turnkey solutions. But there is no right way to do this. It's really depending on the company, the industry, and all those factors. Okay, so then we looked a bit at sort of the landscape. We looked at the affordances. We looked at the digital transformation, and just a brief little note on new channel structures before we go into the real omni-channel. These are three kinds of sort of supply chains, potential ones. You have a producer, you have a wholesaler, you have a retailer, you have a consumer. In some industries, this is still the way that it works. In toys, it's like this. In a lot of fresh food, it's like this. You can have tomatoes produced in Spain, transported via some kind of wholesaler chain in Central Europe or Spain or in the UK, and they're selling to Tesco or so, and then Tesco delivers to consumers. But one way that digital is doing is that digital is making it possible for supply chains to vertically integrate, that is to take over one of those steps. So at the end, both the wholesaler and retailer intermediates are shut out of the supply chain. So that's of course the case when you have a producer who puts up a website and reaches the consumer directly. But to be able to do this, you have to be a really big brand. Perhaps you can be a Adidas or Apple, I don't know. But as you know, even Apple work the omni-channel way. They need the physical stores, even though they've sort of turned it around. The stores are not for selling. The selling is happening online. The stores are for entertaining and educational purposes or experiential purposes. So perhaps the step below that, where you have a producer who is then in direct contact with a retailer, such as Amazon Prime perhaps, who's then selling to the consumer. That could be the case. That's more common. But anyhow, it's interesting to see how you have these disruptive businesses that come in and totally change the also supply chain landscape. Vertical integration is when you take over, or when you reduce the number of steps in the chain. In many industries, take H&M for instance, they don't own their own factories, but they have taken over the wholesaler's role. So they're both the retailer and the wholesaler, and that's very common for a lot of companies. And in some instances, like Zara, they also own their sweatshops, or some of them. So they have a lot of the production also in-house. And when you work with vertical integration, is sometimes referred to as disintermediation, which is sort of what the Ubers can do and what the other apps can do. So they come in and they chop a hole in this supply chain. And I think what we're focusing on in the next part of this lecture is, as I said, omni-channel, and that's actually something called re-intermediation. And re-intermediation is when the industry perhaps has chosen to, or for some reason, some parts of the supply chain were taken out of business. For instance, it could be taxi companies being replaced by Uber. But then all of a sudden Uber raises the prices, or there's a scandal going on, like here in Bath, where some taxi driver didn't behave the way he should. So taxi come back. And I don't know how common that is here, but I know in other parts of the world it's actually often the case that you look at the taxi and it says Uber and it says Lyft and it says taxi and the town. So drivers, they have the cars, they are the driver, and they drive for many different apps and many different companies. So that's sort of one example of a re-intermediation. And also perhaps Apple, they've been trying to sell directly online and they've been trying to use resellers, but they've reopened their stores. They've had stores, taken them away, and now reopened them again. So many times it seems easier with some kind of digital solution, but often the physical appearance, the memory and the experiential aspects of a physical outlet of some kind often makes it impossible for companies to be pure clicks. And that's sort of the re-intermediation aspect of things. Okay, so this whole thing is how those disruptions appear, like iTunes and Amazon and so on. Okay, one final slide, I think, on sort of this step of it before we go into the more pure omnichannel is this one. This is sort of a school book example, but it's very relevant, so I think it's important. Because depending on the channels, you suffer different problems, or you meet with different problems. It's very cheap to set up a e-commerce site or e-commerce store. You can do it with very little effort. You don't have to have any goods even. You can buy them when you get the orders, so it's a very sort of efficient way that way. So there are many, and perhaps you have a big database that you can, just reach out to. So it's good for many reasons, but still it suffers from very low conversion ratios. It's hard to really reach. Perhaps if you realize, if you as a shopper go into a physical store, or if you just, go to a site and you see a banner ad or pay-per-click ad on the side, your interest in that product or clicking or converting is probably very different in those two contexts. And you can see here that even though e-channels might reach more people, the conversion at the end is very different. So it's much more effective still with traditional channels in many ways when it comes to reaching and retaining customers. I think it's interesting to study Jeff Bezos and Amazon, because I think to many companies, I'm working with quite a few e-tailers, and they say that acquiring customers is the hardest, and what they mean is reaching and making them convert. So reaching them and getting them interested enough to actually look at your product, that's sort of the biggest problem. That wouldn't be the case for Amazon's customers, because Amazon is so big, so people sometimes even use Amazon's webpage as the search engine for certain categories. It's come to that people go to the Amazon page and Google instead of going to Google and Google. But so what Bezos is saying is that the biggest problem is actually to retain customers. It's easy to get them to buy once, buy coffee once, buy Red Bull once, but to get them doing that over and over, that's the problem. And that's where the physical store comes in, or the traditional channel comes in. Okay, so having said all those things, let's look at omnichannel more for real. These are arguments or ideas or problems that companies, when I talk to, like the strategic leaders of various companies and ask them what are the challenges you're facing, they all agree on that digitalization is like the biggest issue. And even though those interviews that I refer to now were from 2016 primarily, it's still so. And digital is really everywhere. These are, as you can see, internet penetration by region 2018, and this is 19, so you can see where it's, or a couple of things are interesting. If you take Northern America and Western Europe, it's 90%, and it still goes up, whereas in other areas like Middle Africa, it's 12% 19, it was 12% 18. So it's not as easy as you can say that, well, everybody's catching up. Actually, it grows also in areas where it's been big for quite some time, but there still is a lot of growth potential in other parts of the world. This is the penetration. So how many have purchased something within a certain category for the last year or during the last year. And this is, I think, very interesting. This is the total market share, or all of the total sales. This is the market share for internet commerce. So the figure from 2019, perhaps I should point to 2020 now, but you see this is from 2019, so the 20 figure is just an estimation. I guess that COVID has made that jump a bit, but it's still less than 15% or around 15%. So this means that I'm getting a visitor. It's one of my daughters. The physical channel still owns 85% of everything that's being sold. And I think this is really important, because when I started to do a lot of research in digital 10 years ago, I thought I would be studying e-commerce and, visual merchandising online, and how to work with SEO and pricing strategies online and things like that. But it's turned into, or it's come to that I work with basically only digitalization right now, but it's digital tools and equipment and touch points in the physical world. And the reason for this is that 85% of sales still occur in the physical channel. So you can see that the number of buyers online increase, and you can see that it's estimated that even though Amazon still is way behind Walmart, they're estimated to take over as the world's biggest company in not so many years. But still, you can see also that one thing that's happening is that e-retailers, sorry, I lost myself there, my daughter came in. I'll still keep this so you feel that it's a bit more alive than if it's just a regular kind of recording. Why are store-based retailers such as H&M and the likes, or Morrison's, why are they going online? Well, obviously, basically all sales increases occur online. So the channel online grows 20% or so per year, whereas often physical stores just the sales has just flattened there. And to a large extent, multi-channel can satisfy shoppers more. It's easy for you to search. It's easy for you to find more information. It's easy for you to compare prices and everything. And oftentimes sales in physical stores is declining. So let's just have a brief look at this. When it comes to e-commerce, it's happened in two kind of phases. The first era was around building the web, and that was the big bubble that burst in 2000. So a lot of companies started to try to create online stores, but it was driven by technology companies, and it was driven by the ambition to make use of digital techniques and not so much with the customer focus. And then came broadbands and faster connections and smartphones and all those things, and the second e-commerce era. And I think the big difference here is that this time it's the physical companies that are, alive and well, who start to set up their e-commerce on the side. So if it was like BT or I don't know, Cisco Systems who made the first efforts in the first digital era, it would be like the Tesco's and the Marks and Spencers who will do this or are doing this now. And that's, I think, the major reason why you have a much more promising or much more productive or better working second e-commerce era than the first one. And I think, to me, everything came. I remember it was the fall of 2016. I was at the conference about the digital disruption in New York City, together with some other researchers from around the world to discuss this, and together with companies. And before that, the summer before, I'd been working on a project together with Whole Foods Market, who by then was one of the US largest grocery stores, but they were purchased by Amazon. And to me that was sort of a great surprise. I didn't really see, because everybody was scared of Amazon, everybody was just talking about Amazon, so I didn't really see why would they invest in a physical store. They even had the Amazon Go trials, which was their own physical store, and I didn't really understand why they would have the physical store either, because everybody was just talking about how the e-commerce was growing and so on. So why would they do that? And actually it's also interesting to know that, or to see that the purchase of Whole Foods was by far Amazon's largest investment. So it's interesting to note that this pure click digital native that everybody's scared of actually makes their biggest investment ever in the physical world. So that was sort of with me. And then I went to this conference, and on this conference there were a bunch of bonobos and other companies, digital natives, declaring that they needed physical stores. And then I felt, okay, so now they're growing together. It used to be you had only the physical stores, and then came the online stores, and they were, judged to overtake the physical stores, but rather they grow together. So obviously physical stores have some benefits, e-commerce has some benefits, and together this creates a better customer experience than using only one channel. Yeah, and there you have the investment of Whole Foods as the by far biggest investment that Amazon made. And you can actually also see, I think this is another important thing, that even though it's clear that the growth is in digital or e-commerce, the growth rate has started to decline, and this is a trend it's all over the world, and it's in most industries. So it's still very high, but it's declining at least. And so the conclusion is that some kind of multi-channel or omni-channel or just seamless experience is probably the solution for the future. And again, this is an old slide, but it says the same, but with US figures. In this case, it's 89% of sales occurring in physical stores. And also you should remember that most, like I have a store, I told you, and we have both an online store and a physical store, and we use the online store only to protect our turf, to not lose customers, but we don't make any money, so it's just sort of a marketing effort. All the money we make is from the physical store, and that's the case that's a very common case, that you use the online world on e-commerce just to make sure that you have the wide assortment, or you have the whatever it is that you need to be able to compete, but actually doesn't make any money for you. There was two examples that I forgot to tell you about when we talked about the benefits of omnichannel, when I talked about Amazon and that conference that I went to and everything. I've been working mentioned it a couple of times now. I hope it's often that one company gets stuck in my mind, and then I use that as an example throughout the lecture. Anyhow, I worked a lot with H&M, and they told me a long time ago, and it's still true, that they have the best online sales in the areas where they have the highest density of physical stores. So the physical stores serve a purpose also when it comes to online sales. And Europe's largest commercial real estate company, Unibail-Rodamco, they own Westfield, or somehow are connected to Westfield here in the UK, but they have a lot of big malls throughout Europe. They claim that as soon as a brand opens a physical store in one of their malls, their online sales in that area will go up with 50%. And if they close, they lose that third again. So sales go down 33-35%. And they've seen this over and over in country after country. So if not else, at least the physical store serves as some kind of reminder. You can try products, feel them, look at them in comparison to other things or so. So it's obvious that there is a benefit of having more than one channel. Okay, schoolbook examples. Share a wallet, of course. If you have someone who's buying both online and offline, if you have both kinds of stores, you'll get a greater share of that person's spending. Overcome limitations of existing format. In my store, we have around 5,000 SKUs, articles in the assortment in the physical store. We have 12,000 in the online store, so you can have the long tail, the ones with short dates, fresh food. You can have that online, and then you don't buy it until you have an order, so you never have to stock it, so you don't have to lose in shrinkage or waste. Expand your market. I think we have probably all bought things that we couldn't do before the internet now, like local products. I like football a lot. I like AC Milan a lot. Used to be times when I had to go to Milano to buy a soccer shirt if I wanted the real thing. Now it's just to go into their website. Services more cost effectively, chatbots, chatting, all like that. Leverage existing assets. A lot of companies use warehouses as dark stores. For instance, if you are a Morrison customer, you can order their boxes, which they decide on the products. They come from a dark store, so that's never been to a store. Or you can buy on their websites where they pick in the store. So they try to make use of different kinds of solutions depending on how you approach them as a shopper. And of course all this data gathering that you get. But as I said, all the different channels have their own benefits, and I'm gonna just quickly click through these here because it's so individual and you can think about it yourself. I think it's a useful exercise. So depending on what kind of brand you're interested in, you can see how much good does this do to me. This is exactly, this slide is an American example, so it says catalog. Catalogs is still fairly decently popular in the US, so that's why it's there. I'm just going to give you one little thought, or help you with one thought before we go on. It was the former country manager of H&M in Sweden. He once told me he used to be in the catalog business, and his company was acquired by H&M back in 1995 or so, just because they had realized, H&M had realized that it's a totally different thing to sell or to have a supply chain where you sell from a warehouse to stores or deliver to stores than to deliver to individual households. So that whole logistics system thinking was something that they invested in already in 1995 when they purchased this catalog company. And this guy said that going from being a catalog company to becoming an e-commerce company is much easier than going from being a physical retailer to going into e-commerce. And that's something that Target, second largest retailer in the US, used to be before they merged, knew. So they purchased the solutions from Amazon, the web solutions, and just as well, you know that Ocado is collaborating now with Waitrose, used to be with Morrison's, I think. I haven't been in the UK long enough. So they are sort of the engine underneath the hood for now Marks and Spencer or Waitrose. Anyhow, the thing I wanted to share with you was that Per, this country manager of H&M, he said that it's a totally different perspective. If you go into a physical store, you can within a couple of minutes get an overview of the assortment, what the trends are, what's the fashion right now, should the skirts be long or short, should the colors be bright or not, should the jackets be tough or some kind of more I'm losing the word. Romance was the word I was looking for. Romantic kind of feeling. So in the store it's very quick. In a catalog too, say you open a catalog and you just look through it, it's within a couple of minutes you have a pretty good idea of the assortment, what's there. But if you go online, you can spend hours and still you feel that you haven't really gotten the right feel for the assortment. So I think that's sort of it's interesting. I've done a lot of eye tracking studies online versus offline, and one of the differences is, for instance, that in the online scenario you can always click on the offers tab and then you go through all the offers. That kind of behavior is not even possible if you're offline. So there are many differences, and of course those could be turned into benefits for a channel, meaning that even if you're in the store and you want to look for the offers, then perhaps you pull up your phone and you look at the offers and then, oh yeah, that's good, and then you go and find it. So it's really the interplay of the different. And now I've been talking through most of this. I'll be just very quickly browsing through these things. Store channel, we talked about also the benefits of making sure that customers are connected. We have the web rooming and the what's the opposite now? Well, web rooming is when you go to a physical store and you look and perhaps try for the right size and then you buy it online. That's called web rooming, and that's kind of a cannibalization that a lot of retailers were scared of initially, but it's actually turned out to be the other way around, that if you have free Wi-Fi and you let people take photos trying your outfits, sharing with their friends and so on, sales go up. So even there, the omni kind of perspective has turned out to be good. Catalog is not so relevant for you, perhaps. And then you can see all the benefits of internet. And I think in these COVID times with self-isolation, I think it's going to be a big boost for online. Also some, aspects that we've been referring to, that you can have a wider assortment and so on online. Mobiles. But you shouldn't underestimate all the problems with online. System, computer-wise, all the technological aspects, that's massive. Deliveries, can still, even if we're in this kind of format, how much of all the logistics costs of a typical product do you think occur in the physical store? So if you buy a phone, or you buy a glass, or you buy a banana, how much of the logistics costs, the total logistics costs of this product, do you think occur in the physical store? Rule of thumb is that it's around between 50 and 65%. So between half and 2/3 of the logistics costs occur in the store. And it's because you're breaking bulk. So instead of having a pallet or a big box or something, you take out the individual packages and put them on the shelves. So if you take another example of sort of store or finances, supply chain finances, about half, the difference between the selling price and the buying price, that's the margin. So that's what the retailer has to survive on. About half of that is eaten up by staffing costs. So half the gross margin, or half the margin, is consumed by staffing costs. And 2/3, or between half and 2/3 of the logistics costs occur in the store. So if you think about a store where you have to first get the goods, fill the shelves, put the items up on the shelves, and then go and pick them down again to deliver to an individual shopper, that becomes extremely costly. Basically, it's an impossible business. It will be unprofitable even if you charge the prices that you're supposed to. So you have to add an extra charge for the delivery, not only because of the gas or the petrol and the cost for the truck. If it's groceries, you have to have a truck with one section that's frozen, one that's chilled, and one that's normal temperature. And just a truck alone would cost around 100,000 Great Britain pounds, but still, it also takes a lot of costs. So there's more to it than you think, and therefore it's those outsourcing things where Ocado is running it, or dark stores are running it, or something like that. That's very common. So there are challenges, and you can think about all the 7 S's, the systems and the staff and the skills and everything. And pricing strategies, we have different prices online and offline. Simply because the price elasticities are very different online and offline. So it's, I think in many cases, many companies, they cannot charge different prices online and offline. It's not possible, so they have to stick to one price. So that's a challenge, at least. But this is what we're after. This is sort of the sweet thing about it, that the channels interact. So think again about the Unibail-Rodamco case. With the physical store, the sales of the website go up. With the high density of physical H&M stores, sales go up online. And of course, with the online store, sales go up online. So the whole for the company is better. And I also know quite a few examples of where companies claim that the offline sales go up as a consequence of them having the website, because shoppers can know more about what they're going to expect. So they go to the store to pick it up because they want to see the TV before they buy it, or they want to listen to the sound or see the pixels in real. And now we're back where we started this lecture, actually, at the customer journey. So obviously going from the retail consolidation where we started, going through or taking the step to the first and second moment of truth. I started to talk to you about the zero moment of truth, which is a Google invention. So obviously Procter & Gamble, who invented the first and second moment of truth, they are more, stuck in the physical world, but Google, of course, is trying to understand what about all this search and all this awareness that occurs. I mean, to me, it's obvious that so many products, great products, I don't know, for 20, 30 years, I've been thinking about what is it that triggered my first thought that I want this product. If I want to buy an electrical bike, why or where does the idea come from? Is it that I see some aspirational dude riding a bike, or is it that I hear about the benefits? Is it from an advert, or where does the idea come from? It used to be the first moment of truth in the store. Now it's totally different. It's so many marketing messages are being served to everybody in the online context, and that's sort of the zero moment of truth kind of thing. And I guess it's marketing theorists today say that it's a loop, a cyclical kind of thing, and not the funnel or going from one end of a timeline to another. But I think nobody really ever thought about that it would be like that. It's always been a loop in all models, even though it's sort of stressed now more that it's a loop. And this is one way of looking at the customer journey. So the customer journey and touch points are sort of new, or not new, but at least more recent concepts that you need to be aware of. So the customer journey is sort of the customer decision process, including all the search and all the interaction online and offline and all that. And every time that the shopper meets with the brand is called a touch point. And as you can see on this slide here, something shared on Facebook, electrical bike, makes you search for electrical bike. I love motorcycles. I ride a Ducati, so I've been looking at, there are Ducati electrical bikes, and they are like, they cost 10 times as much as they need to, but I want one. Anyhow, I go to the Ducati website to see that they're not yet in production. So what can I do about, so all these things here are interesting in a sort of theoretical point of view, but also for practical reasons. And I was looking through the top academic journals the last 3 years, and basically all articles are around this. E-commerce, how you can drive traffic with the help of social media, voice, those new aspects of marketing. It's omnipresent. So this is really what at least academia and business believe now to be the future. Having said that, I will serve you with an article of this, and I hope you've enjoyed this first day. So we basically started off with a lecture by Don on brands to set the stage, but then we've been looking at retail consolidation to see how the transformation has gone from the brand as the king of the supply chain to including more of the retailer and sort of the first moment of truth, where retail companies realize that if they only consolidated and streamlined their format, led by companies such as McDonald's and McDonaldization, they can benefit a lot from that. And regained a lot of the power that they'd lost to the brands. And then now we've looked at the digital development and the omni-channel or seamless experience. I have one short lecture left that I'm going to upload, and that's going to be more of a case where I talk about my story and how Jocke, my friend, and I have together worked with primarily social media and Facebook to market our physical store. But I think that will be all for now. Thank you for listening and watching.